Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher, and when you hear data and analytics, we're bringing back Sam Finkel, and this is going to be a little bit of a hybrid edition because Sam was witty enough and smart enough and good enough as it is to quickly put together some tush-push statistics. As the big news for the Eagles is that the Eagles won twice. They get to keep the tush-push, and they beat Roger Goodell, which is almost impossible to do when talking about swaying the owner. So, Sam, the tush push is alive. We'll get to your data and analytics on that. And then we're going to answer some questions in the first of a couple of mailbags that we're going to try to put out over the next few days. So, as we start off, Sam, before we get into the analytics and the data, or maybe we're going to talk analytics and data about beating Roger Goodell. How surprised are you that this thing did not?
I'm shocked. Yeah, honestly, I am shocked. Based on all the reporting I saw, the fact that they changed the rule, like the wording of the rule, I thought that it would, they would legislate this play out. So it's really surprising, pleasantly surprising. I do think that with JalenHurts in particular, like it would have cemented his, case for being that much of an elite player if they took it out. I don't necessarily think it takes away still being able to do it. But I do think that would have been the opinion I would have shared had it been taken away.
I agree with you. I am shocked. I've been on record on Inside the Birds, which you say you listen. You've probably heard me say probably for 2 years now that I always expected that this play would get outlawed and regulated. Not because I wanted that to happen, but because I just felt like it would happen. And again, when Roger Goodell wants something out, usually he gets it. I felt that the owners would come to find it as one of those plays that's not, quote unquote, attracted to the eye. I just thought that they were going to, and I figured that they would try to get player safety in there, and some teams did. But so now, Sam, I wonder this. I almost wonder now that it's beat the odds a couple of times here. I wonder if you're going to see the adverse, is that the word I'm looking for? The opposite effect, where now teams are going to be like, all right, we may not have a quarterback who can squat 600 pounds like JalenHurts. We may not have the biggest offensive line, but I do wonder if teams start to find adaptations like the Packers did, making Tyler.
Yep.
Yeah, their version of the tush pusher, and they did it against the Eagles. That's the funny part. I do wonder if you're now going to start to see it proliferate around the NFL for teams that think they have some kind of personnel that can pull it off.
Yeah, I think that's a natural evolution of the play. And I think that this is just, an innovation. And with innovations, anytime that there is an innovation, there are these next steps in the evolution.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely right. I don't know if it necessarily will be this year, but assuming it keeps surviving, we'll see different variations, I'd expect.
Well, if teams are smart, it would be this year, because this thing didn't get voted out now, I mean, it's gone up for debate now for a couple of years, right? Not voting, but it's been in the conversation for a couple of years, and we'll see if it's still in the conversation. I'm telling you, all it's going to take is one guy like Frankie Louvu leaping over the pile. It's going to take one prominent guy to get hurt for them to start to have that talk again, and then player safety becomes the operative word in it. But we'll see. That's the future. Let's get to your analytics breakdown. And by the way, ever since you and I started doing Inside the Data, and I've been doing the share screen for the YouTube watchers. Now Adam and I are doing we did like a little snake draft of the NFC East, like only NFC East players, offense and defense. We used that too. So now I'm all about presenting the data, Sam, thanks to you, to all of our great YouTube viewers. And again, we will absolutely try to keep into account that we have a lot of podcast listeners that can't see. So we'll make sure we're very clear with our data. But here's the chart that you can see. Up here on the brotherly, I like how you wrote brotherly love / tush push stats, because the Eagles call them neither. They're very on record as not enjoying any of those terms for it. I think they just call them the push. But either way,
to be honest with you, I would love to know that play call name. Maybe in 20 years from now, we'll know it. But that has always been on my mind. What is that play call? Like, what do they call it? Because I think that it would just be so cool to be like a fly on the wall to see the discussions they had when they created the play, when they, install it. It would be cool.
Yeah, it would be funny if a play that just goes for 1 yard and sometimes less than that had some really long, convoluted name, like, Spider X Banana Y, type thing.
All right, Gruden.
Yeah, like Power Z Jam Center Snap. It's like, all right, you mean the push? We're just gonna fall forward. All right.
Yeah, I think that the colloquial title definitely, even if we knew it, would still, be what we refer to it as.
Definitely. All right, so why don't we talk about some of the stats here that we put together, and I'll let you kind of introduce this chart and the context around it.
Yeah. So essentially, according to ESPN, the Eagles went 22 for 31, 70.97% on fourth down in both the regular and postseason. And then according to NFL Next Gen Stats on NFL Pro, of those 31, 9 were rushing attempts by JalenHurts and on fourth and short. Of those 9, 8 were TushPush related, and the Eagles went 8 for 8 on fourth down, which is I wanted to highlight that before we even get into the chart, because I think that's pretty significant that when it really mattered, they were able to get it done on short yardage situations.
Yeah. So the Eagles in their press conferences on Monday, was it Monday, Tuesday, Sam, and I respect them for this. They downplayed the idea that if it did get eliminated, like, it was going to be a big deal. And I agree that they should take that approach. As AJ Brown said, it's just 1 yard. It's like they'll figure it out. And B, I like the way Jordan Mailata put it. And he was like, so, we just won't run it. Like, it's not, that's fine. We can get a yard other ways. And I like how they didn't want their success defined by the tush push. But on the flip side, 8 for 8 on those plays. And they're usually critical plays. And then if you just talk about it in a bigger context from not just this year, but every time they've ran it since they started doing it, there's no question that it's been an influential part of the game, and they became a 4-down team, which changes, right? And I'm going to let you throw this back to you. It sort of changes all the analytics involved on both offense and defense, because now you no longer have to average over 3 yards a play on your first 3 plays to get the first down. If you know you're a 4-down team, you only have to average 2.5 yards per play, which is fairly, I don't want to say simple. It's simpler than over 3 yards. And then when you have firepower and an offensive line, right, that's how it changes the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're right to an extent. I do think it does change, the efficiency metrics of what you consider to be on schedule and what is successful. But I still think there's a threshold value that they need, or of yards they need to actually attain on those first 3 downs to even trigger that fourth down. So the calculus is a little bit more complicated than what you said, but I think you're right. It does change the analytics because you have that extra down, but you have to reach a certain amount of yards in those first 3 downs to even get to that point, I would say.
Good point. If you get less than 3 yards on your first carry or play, it does not exactly mean that you're going to be in a great 4th and 1 scenario, right? Then you put the onus on yourself to make sure your second and third play are equal or more of that. And when you're in a, say, 2nd and 8 scenario, that's tough. I get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, actually, I'll shout out Kirk Campbell right now, who was the quarterback coach at Penn State when I was working there. He ended up actually being the interim OC, and I think he's at Michigan now. He was the OC there at one point. He had this whole analytical breakdown that he went through with me about when you're on second, or when it was 3rd down and long. Do you take, and you have to go for it on 4th? Do you take 2 shots past the line to gain, or do you try to half it? And I remember we had this whole argument in the Penn State room where there were both sides of camps that were, justified in their analysis, but it's just so interesting to think about how play callers actually think about those things.
It's fascinating that there would be a debate and an argument when, as I like to say, two different things can be true at the same time. And that's Absolutely. Why statistics are what they are, right? That's why sometimes you follow the trend and you hit, and sometimes you don't. And you're like, oh man, I thought everything aligned so that I was supposed to make this achievement and it didn't happen.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. That's a great point.
All right. So let's move on to what you have here with the NFL Next Gen Stats.
Yeah. So this is just a breakdown. I hadn't really seen anybody break it down, and maybe they had, and I just hadn't seen it by down, So we look at JalenHurts, and again, this is just JalenHurts. So if they ran it with Pickett or any other, backups, and this is just 2024, 2025. they wouldn't be included here, but I figured for the sake of argument, that's really all we needed to talk about anyway. But with that caveat, basically looked at all the attempts based on downs. So they had actually the same amount of attempts on first, second, and fourth down, but the real meat was in third down.
Right. So I would imagine that the 18 total attempts between first and second down were mostly goal line, first and goal attempts.
100%. And if you look at the total attempts, that's what I was going off on originally. Not all the total attempts were TushPush attempts. So when you break it down, first and fourth were actually the same. And most of those all of those first downs were goal line situations. All the second downs, well, not all of them, but there were only 3 were, goal line or very short yardage. But again, that the meat and potatoes really come in on third down.
Got it.
This was run.
Of course. And that's sort of what redefined them as a 4-down football team and made them even tougher to stop.
Absolutely. And if you look, I mean, the success varies a little bit, but it's pretty high. And I imagine it's higher than most probably or all teams if you compared it.
Yeah. Look at that. 82% in general, 81.58% in general. And then, of course, on third down, 74% of the time. And there were only a couple of times that's like Jacksonville seemed to do a pretty decent job. I think Washington stopped one.
Green Bay stopped a couple early.
Green Bay, that's right. Green Bay had some good stops against it as well, which is ironic because they were the team that, couldn't stop them from actually getting the tush push to stay alive in the end with their proposal. So the tush push appeared in only less than 30% of the play, or less than 0.3% of total plays, which when you step back, Sam, it's like, oh my God. Like this thing took over. This was the off-season storyline and the storyline of the past few weeks. And literally, if it went away, nobody would remember.
It's insane that we get so hyper focused. The NFL community that is in 0.3% of plays, but I mean those 0.3% of plays mattered. To some extent, they changed the swing of some games and they made a big difference. So that's worth mentioning.
And I have to really did you pick this up yourself that the 22-10 vote margin just happened to be the same as the final score of the Eagles Packers wildcard game?
I wish I figured that out, but I saw it all over Twitter, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's just poetic justice. And I thought I'd be remiss if we didn't include it, so I did.
There you go. All right. At least you're man enough to say that was not your own, because I would have been really impressed. Because I wish it was that. All right. So let's sum it up, because that's basically the stats on it. What about the future of the tush push? I suspect, and I'll get your opinion on this in a second. I suspect that no matter what, that the Eagles are working on some kind of modification or something, Sam, so that they're going to unveil something a little bit similar but a little bit different. Almost to like say, you want to stop me from doing it? I'm going to do it a different way and be just as successful.
So one of my favorite things is, I don't remember if it was this year or the year prior, they had a couple wrinkles off of it where they would, put the ball in a different direction or hand it off, or there were little wrinkles on it. And I guarantee there are a bunch of those wrinkles that just never got called. I bet you in their playbook, there's probably 4 or 5, even maybe more variations on things that they could tag onto the play to change it. And I think with how the defense could stop it, like they're going to try. I mean, they're not they can't really stop it. But if they do try to figure out other ways, I think the defense is going to adapt. Ultimately, defense will adapt. They'll find ways to not stop it, but mitigate its success. And so I really would love to see these wrinkles. I think it'd be really fun to see these variations that I guarantee that they have in their playbook.
100%. And now they got Ben Van Sumeren at fullback, who's a big physical guy himself. I think that you'll see some really interesting variations of the push. So that's a wrap on that. Thank you for the data and analytics on it. Very interesting. And now we're going to get to the mailbag section, the much anticipated one, by the way. We got a lot of good emails, enough so that we can continue to do a couple more mailbags over the next few days. And I would ask everybody to continue sending your questions to Sam at insidethebirds@gmail.com. And I'm also going to make a request on behalf of Sam and myself that your question is in the spirit of what we do here on Inside the Data and on Inside the Birds. If you're asking Sam if he thinks, Jalen Hurts is a top 5 quarterback, or if you're asking Sam if you think Nick Sirianni's attitude on the sideline is a bad thing, that's not what he does. That's not what we do here. We're trying to answer specifically analytically driven, data-based questions. Fair, Sam?
I think that's very fair, but I just want to say I'm very appreciative for all the comments and questions we did get, and it really means a lot that everyone's listening and is interested in these things. So what I can answer, I will answer, and thank you.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schulter, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
All right, great. So, Sam, we're going to get two reader, listener, viewer questions in. The first one comes from Kyle B. And it's a really interesting question, and I'm very curious to hear your analytically driven answer on it. And what he wants to know is, how did the offensive performance of SaquonBarkley and the defensive performance of JalenCarter relate to the likelihood of the Eagles winning a game? Which is a really good analytically driven question.
Yeah, I love this question. It made me really dig deep on some of the stats, and it was really kind of a fun thing to research because, you look at it and you're like, these are two of the best players on the Eagles. They obviously contribute. But the deep dive was very fun. So I will say we'll start with Saquon. First off, obviously had the highest rushing yards in the NFL. That helps, right? But what his value is, and I want to talk about, is rushing yards over expected. So one of the things with NFL Pro and NFL Next Gen Stats is it tracks this metric called, and you probably have heard it, I'd assume a lot of our viewers have, rushing yards over expected. And all that really is this estimate of an average NFL running back, what they would get, and how many yards do they get more than that. So that's really the metric that we're going to focus on, at least for this part of the segment. So he had the second highest over the season at 601. He had the second, and to Derrick Henry was number 1. He had the second highest per attempt at plus 1.5. To kind of contextualize that just means for every attempt, he would gain 1.5 yards more than an average running back. Now, that is really impressive. What makes it more impressive is that the Eagles had the most yards before contact since 2019 with 1346. So when you have a great, and that's a testament to the offensive line. So when you have a great offensive line and you have a running back that can add 1.5 yards every time he touches the ball more than an average running back, you're gaining a lot more yards and bringing a lot of value. So when you look at that in the playoffs, it also was a similar trend. He was plus 172, which was the most by any player since 2018.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome. But what I really want to highlight and what I think is phenomenal is something that we all saw, right? He looked better in the second half. So if you look at the second half, of those 601 yards, 496 of them came from the second half. That's 82.53% of his total yards above expected. That is the most by any player since NFL Next Gen Stats existed, which is 2016. Wow. It's a crazy statistic. And, if you look at all of his second half statistics, they all kind of follow that. So his yards after contact per carry, first half was 2.8. In the second half, it was 4. So almost doubling there. His fourth tackle percentage in the first half was 17.1%. In the second half, it was 25.8%.
Wow.
And not only that, but his average speed actually increased in the second half. So it was 12.18 in the first half and 12.78, which is not a huge change, but it's
no,
a change.
But I mean, think about all the carries he was getting. The fact that he got any faster in the second half, despite logging more carries, is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's awesome. And with that being said, since we're talking about speed, he also reached a top speed of 20 plus miles per hour on 14 touches in the season, which is the most, again, since NFL Next Gen Stats existed, since 2016.
That is fascinating. So I think I can. Do you have any more stats? Because I wanted to try to contextualize.
That is the only thing I will say is that the stats that they have is based on qualified rushers, and that's anybody who had 6.25 rushes per game or more. Just want to contextualize that where these stats come from, but that's the only thing I'd add.
All right. So to me, to take all that in perspective, to answer Kyle's question about how much of a difference that makes in victories, right? When you have a player who's gaining that much over expectation, then you're like, well, what if you had the different player? Well, the Eagles the year before had a good running back, not great, a good enough running back in DeAndre Swift. I mean, DeAndre Swift had great traits. He's not a bad player, right? He's a good running back. And you saw that they were unable to be as impactful offensively as they are with Saquon Barkley. So the difference between, with all the yards over expectation, right, between DeAndre Swift and Saquon Barkley was 11 wins and a first-round exit, which could have been even worse the way things were going in 2023, and winning the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. That is a perfect way to summarize what I just said, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. So how do we apply this conversation to JalenCarter and his impact on winning?
So it was very interesting looking at his impact too, right? So he doesn't have all the sacks, and you don't always expect an interior defensive lineman, first off, to necessarily generate them. But what he does is he pressures quickly. So he was 8th in quick QB percentages of all defensive linemen with 25. And what that means is he pressures in 3 seconds or less. On first down in particular, he's 2nd with 12, which is 4.74% of his snaps. So he's really good at pressuring quickly on first down. So you're starting them behind the chains, basically, as is, or in a bad position. Regardless, you're behind schedule. So what he's done is he can get pressure quickly and often and early. That's a huge part of what he does.
Mm-hmm.
He also does a lot of the dirty work. So according to PFF, he was double teamed around 60% of his snaps. And so what that does is it gets good matchups for his teammates, particularly in the interior. So that's why you see guys like Milton Williams or Moro Ojomo doing really well.
Mm-hmm.
In the playoffs, JalenCarter had 14 and Milton Williams had 13. They combined to generate 27 pressures, the second most by an IDL duo in a postseason run since 2018. The first was the 2021 Rams with Aaron Donald and Greg Gaines, 31. So they had 4 more in, I think, 1 less game.
Wait, I'm sorry. Aaron Donald, Greg Gaines. So was that like 30 by Aaron and 1 by Greg? No.
it was predominantly Aaron Donald, for sure. But listen, it said duo, so you got to put the duo.
Of course.
But also, I will say that that stat was from NFL Next Gen Stats. If you look at PFF's pressure stats, PFF is more inclusive in pressure, so that their pressure numbers are actually a little bit higher. There's a little bit of, a discrepancy between the two, but the NFL Next Gen Stats contextualize it pretty well, so we're going to use those numbers at least now. And then the last thing I will add for Carter is his best ability is availability. He played 230 of the 262 snaps in the playoffs, 87.7% of the snaps. Before the Super Bowl, they had like a little blurb about it. He was at 91.7, which was the 5th highest snap share by any interior defensive lineman in a multi-game run since Next Gen Stats existed.
That is pretty telling. I mean, especially considering where he came from. I mean, the year before him, Jordan, all the Georgia guys were not used to playing a whole lot of snaps, and I think we all expected a jump from JalenCarter. But then I forget what week it was. It was pretty early in the year. I think the New Orleans Saints game, maybe, or the week after. It was definitely after the Tampa Bay game because that was hot. But where he played like all but 1 snap, and I remember Adam and I were like, "Holy cow!" We were doing the post game. He played every single snap except 1. And then as the season went on, that was not like an anomaly. It became okay. He's in condition. He was able to play that. And he didn't rotate, and the Eagles weren't as deep as they usually have been in defensive tackle, but they didn't have to be because him and Milton Williams and Ojomo, when he got in, just got the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just shows you when you have a guy that can consistently be on the field, that can contribute in the ways that we just mentioned, that contributes to victory. It really does.
Awesome. Great stuff. So good question by Kyle. Really like that. Like to be able to kind of explore that there with some different data and stats. And now we're going to answer Tanner C's question. Tanner C asks Sam, how do you feel about Howie Roseman aligning the structure of many of the team's cap hits / dead money to align with the 2029 season? Does the void year focus with contracts in the last few years make you nervous? And if not, what makes the Eagles different from the Saints, who are known for doing a lot of those dummy years and void years as well? So
Yeah,
that's
I
kind of a
love it.
mouthful of a question.
Yeah, we'll break it down to make it a little bit more digestible for everyone listening and watching. So we'll start with the first part. How do I feel about Howie aligning the structure around 2029? So I actually just did a Salary Cap 101 podcast with Eagles Eric, and that should be up on whenever, I think Thursday. I think this probably will be up then too.
Yes. What's the name of the podcast so that we can?
So it's The Edge with Eagles Eric, and I co-hosted this one about the salary cap, and I'll go into a much deeper dive on this particular subject there. But I think it's good to give Inside the Birds a little taste of what I researched for that. So for those who are unaware, 2029 is a really big year, and we'll get into why. But basically, team base salary cap, the starting number for salary cap, is calculated by league revenue times the CBA agreed percentage, which is around 48%, minus the projected cost of player benefits divided by the 32 teams. That sounds like a lot. Just focus on the one thing real quick, which is league revenue.
Yeah.
League revenue is derived from three sources: league media revenue, NFL ventures, postseason revenue, and local revenue. And the biggest component of that is league media revenue. And the NFL deal that they currently have signed from a while ago has an opt-out clause in 2029. Many feel that they will exercise this opt-out clause.
Hell yeah, they will.
Because they feel like it's undervalued.
Sure, they're going to renegotiate with every network, every streaming service that's gotten in, every holiday now that they're playing on. They're going to get 10% more, if that, right? 15% more than they're getting now.
Easily. And a lot of it is contextualized with the current signing of the NBA media deal, which obviously has less reach, but is almost equivalent in terms of what they signed. So everyone is expecting 2029 for that deal to increase. If that deal does increase, what it means is the league revenue increases. And in that big formula I spit out to you, when one of those things drives up, it means that salary cap is also going to drive up. And it's good. That's how it really works.
Yep.
So the logic is, and the Eagles are aware of this, right? So they're structuring deals to take advantage of this near certainty. So I'm pretty comfortable with it. Basically because I think they know what's going to happen. It becomes troublesome if they don't get as much as anticipated. And it could get them into some trouble with how they're able to restructure and extend players. But basically, it's not a bad thing. It's done on purpose. There's intentionality behind it. Right. And I feel pretty comfortable, at least with that component of it.
So we've had this discussion quite a bit throughout the years, because whenever the NFL and the NFLPA, whenever there's been a TV contract either just expiring or in this case an opt-out and they're a new deal, those years, and you can go through, if you watch like salary cap where they jump, it's because of the extra new money coming in. So it is a common practice, but and a smart one. And you're right. The only thing that really could short circuit it and make it bad is if, like, I don't know, like a global pandemic would hit. Oh, that actually happened. Not that was the one
time it actually shrank. So you're right.
Right.
It's a huge part of it.
And the NFL has increased its competition over the last 5 years by adding the Netflixes and the Amazon Prime. It's not just, ESPN, ABC, and NBC now, or I'm sorry, CBS and NBC fighting over games. It's newer money coming in from bigger tech. So it's good for the NFL.
It is. It really is. Competition is usually good for the market, at least when you're selling it. So I will say, for the void year focus with the contracts in the last few years, it makes it much harder when you miss on a player, such as Bradbury and Huff. But with the way it works, the way that the void years they're trying to do it is you're basically borrowing future money to help for today. It's like the time value theory of money, that concept where
it's like using a credit card.
Yeah. $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. That's really the thought process.
Right.
So, and honestly,
I know it can be complicated, but it's really not. I mean, if the salary cap is, if you're spending $100 with a $200,000 cap one year, and then you're spending that same $100 against a $400,000 cap next year, you're obviously taking up a lot less of your cap as the year goes on. So this money that's amortized or spread out, it's all around the same. It's a lot of money, but the cap keeps going up. So the hit percentage goes lower and lower. Now, it doesn't make it great. Like you're just bringing up with Hoff or Bradbury. You don't want to be eating dead money, but it's almost like the Eagles have already safeguarded. They've built it in. They know it's going to happen occasionally, but then they get a Zach Bond who way outperforms the 1-year deal that evens it out.
Yeah, and they use these void years, which they at the end they do accelerate, which is an important thing to understand. But they use it as an option, essentially, to restructure or extend the player and keep spreading it out over time. And they just stack on each other. That's the theory behind it. So I'm very comfortable with how everything's structured if it goes the way according to plan.
Yes. And that was a really good question. And I think you did a really good job of contextualizing what can be a difficult thing for people to comprehend. But I think the important thing that you hit on is this is not like, oh, crap, in 2019 this was done with intent. And you explained the reason behind that very well, Sam. So good stuff. We are going to do more mailbags coming up. And I know you've even got some that are going to have some visuals, right? Like we're going to get back into the data and all that. But I hope everybody enjoyed this first Inside the Data mailbag. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching Inside the Data on Inside the Birds.